Right, another big week. PM, of course, in Washington, D.C. Senate estimates, as I said, underway. Middle East, a crisis point. And the fallout from the PM's voice referendum continues to reverberate. Joining me now for all the latest, the Australian's editor-at-large, Paul Kelly. Well, Paul, I want to get your take. Let's step back for a moment, because you and I haven't spoken on camera since the referendum, although we were both at a conference over the weekend and it was top of mind for a lot of people. What's interesting is, yes, it's an absolutely seismic result. Couldn't have been stronger than no vote for the PM. Some are saying internationally, this is our first national vote on identity politics anywhere in the world. But still, we're a week and a bit on now. The PM seems paralysed by the result and unable to take charge of this situation. Where does he go from here, Paul?
I think, Peter, this is a very challenging outcome for the Prime Minister. He said that he accepts the result, and that, of course, is the easy part. His task now is one of healing and attempting to unite the country. That won't be easy. His focus is going to be very much, I think, on practicalities, on closing the gap. He needs to make a renewed effort there, working with Peter Dutton, and I think we'll see that. But the Prime Minister's problem is, I think, the extent to which some of the Aboriginal leaders supporting the Yes case now go radical. And we've seen this in the recent statement, of course, where they're talking about sovereignty, they're talking about legitimacy, and they are presenting a very distorting and misleading view of the vote. They're saying that the vote was a vote against reconciliation. Well, that's not right. It wasn't a vote against reconciliation. It wasn't a vote against the Indigenous peoples as such. It wasn't a vote inspired by racism. But to the extent that this narrative is accepted by some of the Indigenous leaders and by some of the progressives, and I think that will be the case, that'll be a problem for the Prime Minister, because he can't align himself with that sentiment as he attempts to reposition.
Surely, though, he's got to dump the Makarrata Treaty Commission. It's in the budget. He was pressing on with that well before the Voice. The Voice is a holy, or unholy, I'd say, a troika. You've lost the vote on the Voice comprehensively, Prime Minister. You can't now move to treaty, which I'd argue is way more contentious. Surely that's got to go.
Peter, I think this is a really difficult issue for the Prime Minister, and I think to a certain extent he's wedged. Now remember, he said repeatedly he stood by the Uluru Statement in full, Voice treaty truth-telling. Now consider his options. If he walks away from the treaty, he will be attacked by much of the Indigenous leadership. He'll be attacked by the Greens. He'll be attacked and alienate a lot of progressive voters who voted yes. And he'll be in trouble in those seats where there's a Labor-Green contest. So if he walks away, there is a problem. But of course, he's going to face pressure here from the Peter Dutton led Liberal Party, because if he stands by the treaty, Peter Dutton will say, well, he hasn't listened to the people. He hasn't adjusted his core position. He wants to maintain the Uluru Statement. He wants to maintain the treaty. And I think in that sense, Peter Dutton and Jacinta Price will be able to wage a very effective campaign against Anthony Albanese. So in this sense, I think he's got difficulties. He's got very substantial political difficulties, regardless of which way he goes.
We're already seeing that, though, in the polls out since Saturday, a week ago, since the vote. I mean, we're already seeing that reverberate in the polls. I made the point, 40% of the no vote was in the Labor heartland seats. And this is a PM, let's not forget, yes, he's had an extraordinary honeymoon against the coalition in the early months, but this is a Prime Minister that only 3 out of 10 Australians voted for. So, he might seem more formidable than his electoral results at last year's election actually show. And of course, there's no Scott Morrison this time.
Well, there is a leadership issue here because Anthony Albanese made The Voice a test of his own leadership. He's done that for the past 12 to 18 months, and it hasn't been successful. So the issue now will be, what is the quality of his leadership when it comes to the economy, inflation, cost of living, the energy transition, power prices, excessive regulation, getting young people into the housing market, the industrial relations system. These are the issues that matter. And the question now will be whether Anthony Albanese can display the leadership required of a Prime Minister on this range of issues, and they are very challenging structural issues.
Just on that point, though, I mean, this is the first time in a long time we've had a truly left Labor Prime Minister, and that the organ of the caucus is more to the left than the right. We know that the party out of that August conference is more to the left than the right. So, you know, things like energy, he has a challenge bringing energy back to sort of the Labor right or centre ground. He won't. Difficult to see that happening, because even though Bowen's nominally from the right, the policy is absolutely hard left. He's got issues with immigration. He's got obviously issues with Indigenous politics coming out of this Voice. He's got issues on cost of living and his own commitments made, very clear commitments at the last election. So how does he reset, given he's a man of the left, the parties of the left, the caucuses of the left? How does he reset somewhere towards even the Labor right to win back those people who walked away from him in the Voice vote?
Well, it won't be easy, and in this sense, it goes to the question of delivery. Remember, Anthony Albanese became Prime Minister pledging to increase living standards, pledging to cut power prices, pledging to deliver on real wages growth. Now, at the end of his first term, when he goes to the next election, he's got to have some progress made on these issues. Now, you've identified the fact that to a certain extent this is a government of the left, and I think that's true. But what we're going to see in the next year or so is the real character of this government. What does this government really believe? What are going to be the real substance of its policies, and are they going to work? And the point I would make about this, Peter, is all these challenges are very substantial. We're talking here about fundamental structural problems. This is not easy.
Yep.
You can't solve these problems quickly. You can't solve these problems overnight. So I must say that I do think he's going to find this particularly difficult, but he's got to be able to go to the next election with some runs on the board here.
All right, well, let's go to his current visit to Washington, quickly followed, of course, by the visit to China. And we know that, you know, the Washington security class has woken up to the China risk. We know that they were very upset, let's say, not so long ago about the Port of Darwin issue. We saw it dropped out and buried on Friday night. The government now is going to do nothing about the lease of the Port of Darwin, which occurred during the Turnbull government era. He's got talks there in the US with President Biden about AUKUS. We know that a lot of Republicans are very nervous about AUKUS. We saw some announcements today. They're not, I think, very meaningful in a sense about Microsoft and cyber issues. But he has a strategic two-step over the next fortnight in the United States, saying the things the United States, our alliance partners, want to hear. At the same time, he's going to China. There's been some big concessions made to China. He's had some wins too. But it feels like China is letting go of Chongli and changing, you know, issues with wine tariffs, etc., as a bit of a play. And he's falling for it.
Well, at the moment, China's the country making the concessions. Australia hasn't made concessions. I think that's a pretty important point. But in relation to his talks in the United States, yes, the Microsoft announcement is very important. The big game in America is AUKUS. There's no doubt at all about that. And getting the legislation through the Congress, and of course the Congress is a real mess at the moment. So essentially, it's important that we see the President and the Prime Minister coming together, and I'm certain we'll see this in terms of a renewed commitment to the AUKUS agreement. I think the fact that the Prime Minister is in Washington before he goes to China is a good thing, because they'll clearly be talking about China, and clearly we can see that President Biden has taken a tough stand towards China. He wants a strong balance of power in the Asia-Pacific. That accords with Anthony Albanese's position. But at the end of the day, the Americans have got to put their money on the table and show that they can deliver on AUKUS. And so in that sense, the pressure at the moment is on the United States.
All right, we'll see how that all plays out. Paul Kelly, thank you as always.